Why bats, Master Wayne?
Bats frighten me. It's time my enemies shared my dread.
I first became interested in taking on Batman when I heard that Warner Brothers was looking to renew and reinvent the franchise. I'd made my last film at Warner Brothers, so I was able to go to them and explain to them the way I saw the Batman franchise being interestingly reinvented. From the beginning, my interest was in taking on a superhero story but treating it in a realistic fashion. I've always been a big fan of the character, but I am by no means any kind of comic book expert. I felt I needed a writer on the project who really knew the character inside out, really knew the comic world.
Chris's agent rang me up one day. I'd always wanted to write a Batman movie. I remember telling my mother when I was a kid that I was going to go to Hollywood one day and do a Batman film. And in a way, I'd been waiting my whole life for this call.
David, unfortunately at that time, said he couldn't possibly write the script because he only had 8 or 9 weeks until he was going to go off to direct.
I said, if I did do it, this is what I would do, and you can just have my ideas for free. And I talked for about an hour and spitballed a large amount of what the film is. And Chris said, wow, that sounds great. He went away again for a few more days. I got a call again saying, you have to do this, you have to do this.
I guess he's just such a big fan of the character, he couldn't resist carving out the time to just come on board and work out the story with me and then write the first draft.
One of the ironies of this film is it's this massive, massive movie. But the way that the film was created were in sort of very humble settings, so to speak.
David and I would meet at my house, out the back of my garage, in my office, and throw ideas around and really start working out the major beats.
It was clear to me that if they were going to restart the Batman franchise, something very dramatic would have to be done, something very different. In my opinion, we had to go backwards and tell Batman's origin story.
The origin story had never been addressed on film, or really even in the comics. That is to say, there isn't really a single definitive account of the journey of Bruce Wayne into Batman. David Goyer and myself drew very heavily on this great history of this character. It's these key events in Bruce Wayne's life that we know of, and then a lot of very interesting gaps that we were able to interpret ourselves, and those we took to be the most important elements of what makes Batman the great legend that he is. As David was writing his first draft and we were fully working out the story, I actually brought on Nathan Crowley, my designer, and moved him into the garage to start working on the key design elements.
It was in August in LA in the garage with the washing machines, so we had to take the day off when the cleaner came around because they'd leave the dryers on and get way too hot.
It's a really interesting way to work because we, would feed each other information, and Nathan would say, "Oh, I have an interesting idea," and then Chris and I would put that into the story, or vice versa.
By working that way, having your production designer in one room and your co-writer in another, you've really got this, fantastic symbiotic thing going on that's going to give you really great inspiration, which is what happened.
It was very important to me that nobody see anything of what we were doing until it was finished, until we were ready to show different elements.
We are used to working on films where you're fighting to let people know about your film. On this, we were fighting to, keep it all under wraps.
We had a fake name for the project that Chris came up with called the Intimidation Game, and all the documents, all the contracts, the scripts, things like that were the Intimidation Game.
It had nothing to do with the title of the film, but people ended up thinking it was the title of the film, which was all a little bit strange.
After we finished the script, no photocopies were made for the executives at Warner Brothers. They came to Chris's house and sat in that same garage. They brought in some couches and read the script there.
That initial stage where you're getting to really let your imagination run free and really explore ideas is one of the most fun parts of the filmmaking process. You're really trying to think and design and dream on the grandest scale imaginable. It was important for me in the case of this project to figure out who was going to be putting that cowl on before we really nailed down the script.
There are a lot of people that would make a good Batman, or there are a lot of people that would make for a good Bruce Wayne, but we couldn't find a lot of people that we thought could do both. The first half of our film takes place before Bruce puts on the costume for the first time. It was important to us that the audience be really invested in Bruce Wayne and not just marking time anytime he was on screen until he would put on the cape and the cowl.
Christian was the first actor I met with, actually, and it was clear to me, looking into his eyes, that this is somebody who can make you believe in the possibility of somebody devoting their life to something this extreme. Christian was driven enough to want to be involved with the project that he was prepared to take a lot of things on trust in terms of what I was intending to do with the project. Because when I first met him, the script hadn't been written yet.
The image that I had gotten from Chris was that he was a far more dangerous and volatile character than I'd seen him played before.
Christian had a very controlled and specific approach to how he wanted to portray the aggression of this character, the animal-like quality. He talked a lot about having Batman crouching in the shadows, and he's constantly sort of crouched on railings or the sides of buildings, very much the way he is in comics.
You just couldn't pull it off properly unless you became a beast when you were inside of that suit.
When I first met Christian, he was extraordinarily thin, having lost an enormous amount of weight for The Machinist, which he was about to go off and shoot.
He did call me and say, well, you know, how do you look right now, you know? Like, how am I gonna seriously be able to suggest to Warner Brothers that you could play Batman ever if, you know, you're that skinny?
He then proceeded to put on a lot of weight in muscle terms and really try and bulk up, because I had impressed upon him the idea that for Bruce Wayne to really fill that suit, he was going to have to be very, very large.
I was just stuffing my face all day long and lifting heavy weights and eating more, and eventually went up to like 220 pounds.
I hadn't met Christian, and I was expecting to meet this bag of bones. And I went, oh my God.
I just listened to what he said about get as big as you possibly can. So that's what I did, you know? But I was kind of like a bear. I wasn't really like a martial arts, you know, guy all lean and ripped and everything like that.
I had to very sort of gently suggest to him that he you know, cut down a bit.
I could see the look on Chris's face, you know? He looked at me and it was like, oh Christ, you know, what has this guy done?
There was a moment where he was really big and we were thinking, God, is he gonna fit the bat suit? Is it, you know, how is this gonna work?
It was a moment of panic where I realized, oh crap, you know? I took Chris at his exact word about get as big as you can, but he didn't really think I was gonna get that big. A number of the crew I'd worked with on previous movies, they looked at me and they were like, bloody hell, Chris, what are we doing here? Fat Man or Batman? And so I realized, okay, that's not what he had meant. So I had to then try and lose a lot of weight.
We worked on his stamina and built his muscle tone so we could bring his body back up to being what it needed to be for Batman. And Christian knew anyway, because he was such a focused guy. He knew his own body.
Very nice.
Christian showed extraordinary levels of self-discipline and dedication to the role to be able to do that. A lot of actors, when you start working with them, they'll say they're going to lose a bit of weight for the part or whatever, and the wardrobe people will kind of roll their eyes and go, yeah, sure, because they very often don't. And I had to warn the wardrobe people on this film that he was actually going to do what he said he was going to do.
It really was. It was a very tight schedule, but I just about managed it before we started filming.
I think the closest to what I saw for Batman that I had seen in another film was probably the Dick Donner Superman film from 1978. And one of the things that made that film so epic was the great casting. I felt that Batman deserved a similarly epic treatment, and so we decided to go for the best actors and the best stars possible, so the principals are all fleshed out with these wonderful supporting roles. You know what I mean? It's just a spectacular cast around Christian.
Just know that there are those of us who care about what you do with your future.
Haven't given up on me yet.
Never.
It's essential that Alfred is a credible father figure because he is the person who raises Bruce Wayne.
In the Civil War, your great-great-grandfather was involved in the Underground Railroad, secretly transporting freed slaves to the north. And I suspect he found these cabins handy.
Casting Michael Caine in this role allows us to create a really wonderfully rounded character who really can be a true father, surrogate father to Bruce Wayne.
I will go back to Gotham and I will fight men like this, but I will not become an executioner.
Bruce, please. For your own sake, there is no turning back.
Liam Neeson plays Ducard, who is this mentor to Bruce. He essentially teaches Bruce all kinds of techniques of martial arts and so forth, but I think he also offers him a level of guidance, and at a time when Bruce is really looking for answers.
What's great about Liam is Liam ultimately plays one of the villains, and he's never played a villain before. And he always plays these sort of fatherly, avuncular, mentor-like characters, which he does need to play in this film, but when he turns, he really turns. We first talked about the character of Lucius Fox. I said to Chris, well, the only person that can play this is Morgan Freeman.
We felt it was important to connect Bruce's assembling of the tools to become Batman, and Lucius Fox helps him in his quest to become Batman without ever knowing exactly what Bruce's quest is.
Look, Mr. Fox.
Yes, sir.
If you're uncomfortable...
Mr. Wayne, you don't want to tell me exactly what you're doing. When I'm asked, I don't have to lie. But don't think of me as an idiot.
Fair enough.
He knows there's something going on, but there's a sort of interesting unspoken understanding between the two men.
Gary Oldman was an idea that Chris had, and he doesn't seem like the obvious choice given some of the roles he's played.
I think Gary Oldman has never really played such a wholesome character. He's played a lot of bad guys, Gary, but he is a chameleon, and he inhabits the role of Gordon.
The really cool thing about Gary Oldman's performance in Batman Begins is that if you look at Frank Miller's Batman Year One and the depiction of Gordon in that comic, that's exactly what Gary did. I look at Gary in the movie and I don't even think of him as Gary Oldman. He just seems like Gordon.
It was important for us to have a person who was close to Bruce from childhood, knew him before all of these things went wrong.
Rachel, who's played by Katie Holmes, is a very strong character in her own right, and she's not at all the damsel in distress.
What these great actors bring is a sense of three-dimensional reality, the sense of a real world in which Batman and Bruce Wayne is functioning. And it's very satisfying to look at the finished product and realize how much of it does stem absolutely directly from those first months where it was just us on our own, throwing ideas around.
The project was incredibly secretive. At the beginning, for a couple of months, I couldn't even reveal that I was working on it. And I'm a big comic book reader, and there's a local comic shop that I frequent, and I went in one day and I bought, I don't know, 6 or 7 Batman graphic novels, things like that. And my friend that runs the comic book shop said, "What's going on?" And I said, "Nothing." And he said, "Why are you buying so many Batman graphic novels and comic books?" And I said, "Oh, I'm just interested." And he said, No, there's something's up. "Are you writing the new Batman movie?" And I said, No. And he said, "You're writing the new Batman movie, aren't you?" "You are." No. It wasn't until they revealed maybe 6 weeks later that he said, "I knew it, I knew you were." Chris and I would take walks from time to time if we felt like going on a break, and we would go to the Batcave where Adam West and Burt Ward would be flying out with their Batmobile. And then we would also spend time frequently working at a local diner. We would take breaks for lunch and we would go there almost every day. Chris would order the exact same thing every time, which was an omelet with avocado, a side of bacon, and cream cheese. And we would work there, and I remember it was crazy because at one point someone sent me a link to something on the internet, and some fan had seen us at this diner and had heard that we were working on the Batman film and said, oh my God, you know, Nolan and Goyer were there at the diner, and I've seen them more than once, and they're clearly working out the story for the new Batman film. So if anyone's in the vicinity, see if you can walk by the table and pick up any story points or something like that. It was very funny to read about something like that.
David Goyer and myself drew very heavily on the history of the mythology of Batman. There is this great, 70-year history of this character.
In terms of comic book characters, Batman has always been the crown jewel of the comic book world.
Batman has been blessed in that somehow he has attracted more good writers and artists over 60-plus years than almost any other character.
The great part about Batman is that in some ways he's indestructible. As long as you stay true to the origin of who he is and what he's about, very hard character to break.
We've been perfecting Batman's story for 66 years. The movie carries that one step further.
I felt that everything we were going to do in terms of translating the character story onto film was going to have to be extremely reverent to the history of the character and the mythology of Batman. The origin story had never been addressed on film, or really even in the comics. That is to say, there isn't really a single definitive account of the journey of Bruce Wayne into Batman. So there are sort of fascinating gaps in the mythology there to be played with.
There's a gap of at least 7 years when he disappears from Gotham, and they just never told that story. And when I first talked to Chris Nolan, I said, you've got to tell that story. And I think people like origin stories to a certain extent. And it was a way of doing something new and different that had never been done in film or television or in novels or in the comic books. And that excited me, and it obviously excited DC and Warner Brothers and Chris.
The magic of the origin story is it provides the most fundamental moment of connection to the character. How would you react if this happened to you, and what set of incredible circumstances could possibly take someone on a journey from this moment in their life to this moment in their life?
He's here. Who? The Batman.
Christopher Nolan and Mr. Goyer, they really cared about the source material. They showed up here and met with Paul Levitz, and they went through tons and tons of different graphic novels and comics. They definitely culled from the last 30 some odd years, and they got the character, they got it.
What we tried to do was provide the best resources for the filmmakers. So we went back and did everything from finding the most interesting versions of the Batman origin, the most interesting treatments of a particular villain. Here's the classic arc that introduced Ra's al Ghul. Here's the 2 or 3 best Scarecrow stories that were done. And you really let the filmmakers draw the inspiration where they may.
There were 3 pieces of work or eras of Batman that were somewhat influential to Chris and I when we were working. The Long Halloween was a piece of work that influenced us, which was this great maxi series by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale. And there were elements of that. Carmine Falcone, who's one of the mob bosses in Gotham. It's a very sober, serious approach to Batman, and we really like that.
Where were the other drugs going?
I never knew. I don't know. I swear to God.
Swear to me!
And then we were also influenced by some of the 70s Batman comic books written by Denny O'Neil and primarily drawn by Neil Adams.
The late, great Julie Schwartz had a name, Ra's al Ghul, which he got somewhere, means head of the demon. And he and I decided it was time for a new major villain. Let's not recycle the Penguin yet again. And so I went home and wrote a story. Neil Adams did an incredible job of rounding out the characterization and really making it unique visually. I mean, he's clearly not the guy you pass on the street, and yet it isn't some sort of gaudy red and yellow superhero costume.
If you look back at the stuff we were doing in the mid-70s, a lot of it was the first period where Batman emerged beyond Gotham, where he acknowledged that there was sort of a real world surrounding Gotham City.
And we liked that element because we were determined not to have this film feel like it had been filmed on a lot. We wanted there to be locations that would expand it, that would make the playing field and the canvas feel larger.
Ra's al Ghul, what are you seeking? I seek the means to fight injustice.
Ra's al Ghul's goals were sort of larger than the Penguins or the Jokers or something like that.
Gotham's time has come. Like Constantinople or Rome before it, the city has become a breeding ground for suffering and injustice. It is beyond saving and must be allowed to die.
He is as obsessed with his mission as Batman is with his. Batman has a kind of narrow view of things. Crime, stop it, eradicate it. Ra's has this sort of planetary view that unless we do something, we don't have much time left.
Here's a guy who actually sees Batman as an equal, as a willing heir. It's the father to the son that he never had. And for somebody to feel that way so beholdingly and then have an ultimate rejection between the two, incredibly compelling storytelling.
You are my greatest student. It should be you standing by my side, saving the world.
Here's a Batman who lost his parents, has a chance in this case to have a parent, and rejects it. There's something fascinating about that.
The jumping off point really, for me, had been a story called The Man Who Falls, and it suggests various points along the development of Bruce Wayne into Batman. This idea that he travels the world and is mentored and tutored in different disciplines by various individuals and then returns to Gotham. For me, it was a fascinating story, and it was a fascinating connection between Bruce's early childhood trauma, falling down this well and being attacked by these bats, and then the persona that he then develops in order to use people's fear against them.
Another piece of work that influenced us was Frank Miller's Batman Year One, because that did deal with the first year of Batman being Batman, and the approach was very no-nonsense and very tough. And there was a great relationship that Frank Miller developed between Bruce Wayne and the beginnings of Batman and Gordon, who is not yet Commissioner Gordon.
I never said thank you.
And you'll never have to.
It's a great story about crime and corruption in the big city and how one man can make a difference.
As gritty a story as that is, it's a story about hope. You have James Gordon, who's given up faith in being a policeman, lost a lot of purpose in his life, and is really probably at the lowest end. And here's a guy who's a needy soul, meets probably the ultimate needy soul in Bruce Wayne's Batman.
Get her downstairs. Meet me in the alley on the narrow side.
What is that?
Back up.
What that? And together they find a way to lift each other up. So it's a great character perspective. In that book, I get to learn about Batman through James Gordon's eyes.
I think Frank was the first one to suggest that the police force in Gotham City was corrupt, and that left an opening for Batman to operate in, because if the police force were doing their job, there wouldn't be as much of a need for Batman, and that would force Gordon to rely on Batman because he couldn't rely on his own police force. That relationship we were definitely influenced by.
Frank, from Batman Year One to The Dark Knight Returns, have given such strong visual and classic interpretations of the character while staying true to everything that had come beforehand. that he really was able to embrace everything that makes the character so strong, so iconic, and so identifiable, but we're able to put that polish on it that makes it extremely contemporary at the same time. I mean, this is a 60-year-old character, and he's never felt more new than when Frank touches it.
I've read a lot of Batman stories. I would say that my all-time favorite would be Dark Knight Returns. I mean, A, it was inspirational, B, it was revolutionary, C, it really captures sort of the zeitgeist of the times. I mean, really, it came out in the 80s, it touched on politics, Reagan years, pop culture, and I thought it brought it all together in a way. So it's a great Batman story, but it's also a great story about that time in America. And it actually was Dark Knight Returns that got me into comics.
When Jim Lee stepped on board and was the artist on Hush and came up with the year-long arc on the Hush storyline, he was able to inject new life, new energy in Batman, which we hadn't seen in years. He gave everybody an interpretation that really works for today, and he gave everybody an interpretation that they can embrace and call their own for all the readers who are on the books right now.
If you draw the line between Neil Adams, Frank's work, and Jim Lee, they're all artists who cast a very full illusion. They're not drawing from a cartoon iconography as much as an immersive world. You're here, you're in the middle of this is happening to you along with the characters.
There's a heightened awareness for our characters again. With Batman and Superman soon to be following as a feature, they're back in the spotlight. People are talking about them again. And when people start talking about them, they start remembering, oh, I remember Batman in the movies, I remember Batman in the TV show, I remember Batman in the cartoons. Batman's been introduced to almost every person, but in different medium. That's what makes it interesting. So what we had to do here is create a comic book that appealed to those sensibilities and those interests. We were kicking around this idea of a new all-star line, and naturally it seemed like the right time to do it. The fact that the movie was kicking in, the movie was about to hit the screens, the book was coming together all at the same time, it was just right serendipity for the project.
The idea behind the all-star line is to let creators work on classic characters without sort of the drag of continuity. It allows us to really go to the source material, start from scratch, and rebuild these characters up in a fresh, contemporary way, at the same time making them true to the original creations.
Frank Miller and Jim Lee are the people that can give you a definitive story. That's why we went to them. We knew, being fan-favorite artist and being fan-favorite writer, this is a match made in heaven.
Frank and I met a couple times to talk about sort of the tone of the book, what he wanted to do with the characters, sort of the approach he was going to take, and it really is a story more about Robin, which is a different approach. I mean, most Batman stories with Robin, he's always the sidekick. It's usually from Batman's point of view, and by looking through Robin's eyes, you really see Batman in a very different way. You know, he's obviously his idol, but he's also, an adult. So I think there's a lot of stuff that hasn't really been mined, and I think that's what Frank's great at, is really taking stuff that's been there for decades and really kind of dusting it off and putting a fresh spin on things.
The great part about working with Jim Lee and Frank Miller are that they're both so intimately aware of who Batman is and have such a strong interpretation of them, and more importantly, have been instrumental in the interpretation of the character over the last 20 years, that they bring a certain level of respect and understanding to it.
So this All-Star book will actually give people kind of a fresh, modern reintroduction to the classic version of these characters. I mean, when I read the script to issue 1, I'm a 50-year-old man sitting there going, shucks, this is great.
Why have so many characters that were created around the same time faded away, yet Batman stays around? I think the pure motivation, the origin of who he is, and how he ultimately became Batman is so identifiable and so timeless that anybody's going to stay with that character because of that.
He's sort of gone from just being a comic book character to a character that's completely permeated the public consciousness.
Batman's world is recognizably ours, but it's a tweaking of reality. It's a heightening. That's, I think, exactly what this movie does and what the best Batman stuff has always done.
As you hear.
It is a story on an absolutely epic scale, and that is what Batman deserved, and that's what we tried to do. And I think that telling a story on this scale has been certainly a challenge, but also really a lot more fun than I anticipated. When you start to examine the realistic idea of why Bruce Wayne would dress up as a bat, the best explanation offered by the comics is the notion of him using fear against those who would use fear themselves.
Where are you?
Here. When he's looking for the most intimidating symbol that he can think of, he naturally gravitates towards the thing that has frightened him the most as a child. Essentially, Bruce Wayne becomes his own worst fear. The costume has to be frightening, or it has no purpose. For it to be intimidating and imposing, it had to have a sense of function that would play into the credibility of Bruce Wayne putting on this extraordinary costume.
Theatricality and deception are powerful agents. You must become more than just a man in the mind of your opponent.
What the hell?
But I wanted to combine that with a design that incorporated the more operatic, animal-like, organic qualities of the costume.
Chris wanted his legs to be more supple, and him to be able to kneel down when necessary. And he also really, more than any other thing, wanted Christian to be able to move his head more and not do the superhero movement of turning the shoulders and the head at once, you know?
The last versions of the costume had a very kind of industrial, almost kind of machine-made kind of look to it. Chris, with Lindy and Julian and Dan sculpting, were reducing it back to the human figure.
We came up with the idea that it was something like a combat outfit.
No mech survival suit for advanced infantry.
It had a really high-tech inside mixed with a wetsuit. That would explain why it hugged the body and looked so sort of neat and sexy, really. You actually saw the inner workings of this suit. It's kind of carbon fiber plates. It protects the core of your body from falling below a certain temperature. He goes into the workshop and decides to spray it with a latex black spray, which removes the heat signature. So if you look with night glasses, which detect body heat, this refuses to allow you to see it. And as he tinkers with it, you see how he develops it from that into the black bat suit.
Once it was actually getting made for me, there's all sorts of interesting processes that you go through where you have to have your whole body, you know, molded.
A plaster Christian Bale is then produced out of that mold, and as soon as the concept sculpt was approved, it's literally broken down and remolded into the different parts of the costume. And the cowl, the torso, the legs, they all have to be sculpted individually from that original one piece. Getting the foam as black as possible was a problem, as that reduces the durability. We're not painting the foam, it's kind of the foam as it is. When those molds have been injected, they're cooked in a big oven, and then they come out of those molds. They're wet. It's just a very efficient way, is just to put it through an old Victorian housemaid's mangle just to extract the water. The piece taken out and dried, they're then prepared for trimming. The mold doesn't produce like a cookie cutter kind of effect. There are flashings, these sort of waste areas on the edges of the foam that have to be trimmed back before it's glued down to the suit. And they're trimmed very patiently by our wonderful girls in art trimming. It has to appear as if it's cut by laser and not by hand. It's not the most comfortable thing to wear. I mean, it is foam latex, it's hot. But on the first day shooting, Christian managed to wear it all day, including the cowl and the gloves, not really wanting to take it off. So I think the level of comfort has improved somewhat as well. The Hell itself is very expressive. This man's angst really shows through on the sculpt. Rather than being a mask, it actually shows his character.
I love the sensitiveness of it. You can feel the workings of his face underneath it.
It gives you this huge neck, you know, kind of like a panther, this real kind of feral look, you know, as you're going to pounce on somebody all the time.
I was just surprised at how intimidating he becomes and how much it changes him.
He really channels this other character.
When he's confronting an individual that he wants to take down, he kind of ceases to be human.
I swear to God.
Swear to me!
There's naturally, after 6 months of filming, a kind of a love-hate relationship with the thing, because you get headaches in that thing, you know? And I kind of say to myself, use it, you know? The guy's meant to be kind of fierce. When you get a headache, you feel fierce anyway, you know? You got no time for anybody, you're impatient. So I just said to myself, use it, you know? And I just put up with it, you know? This is a hell of an honor, really, getting to wear this.
In the comic books, the cape flows, and you always see Batman crouch like a gargoyle on the edge of a building, and the cape kind of billows and drapes around him.
Chris really, really wanted the romanticness from the comics of the cloaks. So they had to be supple and they had to be able to take the wind.
We did prototype using actual velvet fabric. We got quickly bogged down because it got waterlogged and, you know, became sort of too heavy. So we invented our own fabric.
Which is the finest parachute silk, which is a nylon, so it's waterproof. And then flocked, which means you shoot little tiny hairs into it. So it ends up as if it's a velvet pile. So it's got the animal feeling on the outside and the waterproof nature and the lightweightness that it flies.
I was doing a lot of research with the Department of Defense, and there's something called memory fabric that they're experimenting with now. It's very soft and supple, but when an electrical current is applied to it, it can take on a rigid shape.
It's not who I am underneath, but what I do that defines me.
He uses the cape and cowl to create a symbol that the people of Gotham will either respect or fear.
What the hell is that?
What the hell are you?
A man who is just flesh and blood can be defeated, can be destroyed, whereas a symbol can transcend the idea of just being one man.
I'm Batman.
We wanted the look of Gotham to have a recognizable texture, like a sort of New York on steroids.
Between set builds, miniatures, locations, we can create a world.
Roll cameras!
We have a true working set that's on the scale of a real city.
The guys that we've got here have managed to build what they've built in 100 days.
It had a whole river flowing through it and waterfalls, and like on the 5th day I'd find a different section of the set.
This film is a designer's dream, really.
The overall tone and feel of the film is reality, but heightened reality. What does a comic suggest to you in your mind? That's the world of Gotham we're actually trying to create.
We kind of realised that I needed to start designing key elements of the film to help him as he wrote.
We started to develop the look of Gotham in parallel with the script development. What I wanted to do was to build up the world of Gotham as a sort of exaggerated contemporary New York.
We'd taken trips to New York. Gotham has always been based on New York, and to Chicago. And we'd been looking at places like the old Kowloon City in Hong Kong, We were really looking around, how we were going to go about designing a city. This is a model of what really are the slums of Gotham that I made myself in Chris's garage. Obviously,
tráilers.
pretty much went up all the way to the roof.
Having Nathan in the garage, sticking models together and just coming up with the look of the film, it just worked amazingly well, and it sort of advanced our process.
Visual effects are very important for being able to help create the environment of Gotham City. Chris wanted a degree of realism which he felt he hadn't seen before in visual effects work. He really wanted to show just what a monstrously overwhelming place Gotham City is. The description in the script was that Bruce looks out of the window of his executive jet and he sees the spires of Gotham catching the first gold of dawn as the sun rises. This is a key shot for us in establishing our ability to create photorealistic landscapes for the film. We've added piers and jetties, we've added things like smoke plumes, we've got all the boats are now in the shot, and all of this was actually sourced from reality.
You sort of essentially build buildings in 3D, but you map photographs onto them. So you get the shape from 3D modeling, and then you get the photographic reality from photos taken actually in Chicago. We shot something maybe like there's close to 1 million photographs on this show, sort of gathering all the possible photographic sources from Chicago we could, day and night, rain, sun, snow, the whole thing.
And so what we've got here is an aerial plate, and basically what the camera's doing is it's supposed to be following the monorail train round the corner, heading towards Wayne Tower, which is going to be down at the end of the street here. The streets had to be completely clear, so the city has a ghostly look to it. We're going to need to make this look like this whole thing is alive. Here's our finished shot, which follows the monorail train. We've added in Wayne Tower down at the end of the street. All the vehicles you see driving across the bridges and down the road there, these are all digitally created. There was a point at which we achieved a certain standard of realism on this shot. That made Chris feel that it was possible to produce photoreal cityscapes that would fit in with the rest of the photography of Chicago and the big Gotham City set.
In terms of looking at Wayne Manor, we've decided to represent the way the audience sees the wealth of the Wayne family, which is very important to our story.
Took quite a fall, didn't we, Master Bruce?
And why do we fall, Bruce? So we can learn to pick ourselves up.
We've chosen an approach to design that gets away from the sort of simple wood paneling and suits of armor, that kind of thing that's become very familiar to audiences as a portrayal of money. We want to show to them in a fresh way, and so there is a slightly different emphasis on the look of the place and the feel of the place than we've felt before.
After seeing about 20 manor houses, we came across Mentmore, which sits about an hour and a half north of London. And what's particular about this place is it has a white interior, which suddenly occurred to us that because he returns some years later after his parents' death, we could really play the white interior as a mausoleum, like the place has been closed up. And suddenly that sparked off all these ideas, well, we could have everything draped and shrouded and all the carpets rolled up and the white marble floor exposed and just this really unfriendly place.
In imagining the Batcave, we set out to look at the origin myth as it's been portrayed in the comic book, and we were very drawn to the notion of existing caverns underneath Wayne Manor rather than something that's constructed.
Because it's Batman Begins, we wanted to explain who dug the Batcave, How does that work, how does he pour 500 million tons of concrete in in secret? We really wanted to explain that the Batcave isn't a man-made place. It sits under Wayne Manor, and it's a cave.
Gradually, over the course of the film, we start to build up the idea of the larger world of Batman and the larger world of the Batcave.
The Batcave was on the H stage at Shepperton Studios, and that was sort of the next garage.
The Batcave starts with the rigging, then we go into wood, and then we cast these sheets, thousands of sheets. These are cast off existing rocks. Up above, you'll see those arches up there. They're basically the foundations of Wayne Manor. And we're saying this was an underground lake that's drained out, so we're actually building a river that runs through here. And slowly but surely, we end up with a Batcave.
We actually ended up flooding the whole stage because it was just easier rather than building self-contained tanks. Chris was a little bit dubious about flooding the stage, but I think after he saw the immensity of the water we put into it, he realised it was probably the best thing to do. It was an element where you got lots of reflections and twinkles. That, you know, it was a dark set, and that just brought it out and made it a living cave, really.
The Batcave is a very realistic environment, and so my goal was to try to light it in a realistic way and keep that believability going. We're dealing with black walls, somewhat reflective walls, which helps quite a bit. And then we're dealing with Batman, a matte black costume, so you have to try to figure out exactly how you're going to separate one from the other. Luckily, working with my gaffer, Perry Evans, we started to crack it a little bit and figure out exactly how we were going to bring some of the light into the Batcave without seeing them, because there's a roof over much of the Batcave, and we have to find a way to sneak the light in. And then specifically lighting the first scene that Bruce Wayne sees the Batcave.
In order to master your fear, you kind of have to dive into it. Bruce decides that in order to become Batman, he's going to immerse himself in the bats beneath Wayne Manor, that he's going to have to be comfortable with that before he can really become Batman.
We knew we were going to have to do digital bat shots. We did an early on test trying to use real bats to see how they would play, but they tend to, not be very cooperative. I think one day of shooting with those convinced everybody that we're going to go digital with the bats.
And then seeing bats swarming all over you. Swarming all around.
You start from reality, of course. So we actually digitally scanned some dead bats to get their full-on shape, recreate those in 3D, paint them up, texture them to make them look like real bats. In order that we can have bats fly around in there, what we actually did, we used a thing called a LiDAR scanner. It's basically a laser that sweeps across the surface of objects, and it's used by the military and also used in visual effects all the time now, and it records the three-dimensional shape of the environment. So by doing this, we can basically build a 3D version of the set, and then we can use that to sort of have the bats avoid objects and have them correspond to real objects as you photograph the plate as well. I think these days visual effects has sort of expanded its role storytelling-wise. Now you can do things that you couldn't do before, you can do them seamlessly, and you can do them fairly cost-effectively. And I think once he saw where we could go with that, he realised that, yes, avoiding all that back guano is definitely the way to go.
We always knew we had to build a majority of the Narrows as a set because it's something we couldn't find. So we are building a section of the Narrows for real in this giant airship hangar.
When we first started looking at Cardington, I think that there was probably a certain amount of scepticism from everybody, really, because it wasn't a ready-made stage by any means. It actually took us 10 months from the moment we took over that place to the moment where we were able to shoot in there.
When you are in Gotham and Cardington, you think that you are in a major city because it's so vast. It's almost like a limitless set. Far and away the largest stage that I've ever worked in.
It's like putting 8 of the largest LA sound stages in one building.
We built a model of the hangar so that we could make sure that what we were designing would fit within the hangar and would work within the space. Big advantage here, and what I think the designer and director liked, was the height that we've got. We've basically got 160-foot height.
The set is a sort of complex series of areas. So you'll turn a corner and you're in the Narrows, and you'll turn another corner, you're on a Gotham street. And then, the Gotham street gives background to the Narrows, so it all becomes a giant set build.
We've managed to build a city, an actual freeway, a borough, and then a downtown area, all in the same building.
Basically, we're incorporating 2 parts of Gotham City, the Narrows. As it sounds, it's a very narrow part of the set, and the buildings are all overhanging, lots of balconies. It's quite a tight space to work in. And then the second part of the set, which is beyond us, further down the hangar, is really the main drag of Gotham. Main drag will have a lot of traffic in. We're looking at running, maybe 50-odd cars through the set. And then under the structure itself of the hangar, we've got a full freeway. So that's 3 lanes of traffic running the entire length of the hangar. There's quite a lot of stuff involved with that. Obviously, we've got to work out all the road markings. The traffic lights are all wired up. A lot of the street dressing that were brought in, we actually bought in America and had it shipped across. As part of the design of the set, we've had to lay in cabling under the ground so that we can get all our steam effects up through the manhole covers and the drains. So there's a lot of work.
To me, it really is the space that looks the most like a real city night exterior, and yet we lit every inch of it from scratch.
Because we had this fantastic indoor space, we were able to shoot during the day and make it look like night.
The best approach to lighting Cardington was from the inside out. We put different colored gels on the windows, we hung things inside the windows, and we brought it to a place where I think it really looks like a real city. So I'm quite proud of the way that the Narrows came out on film.
Action. You know, these sets are just phenomenal, that we've built this entire city of Gotham, you know, within this vast hangar here. It's a big production, but with such fine attention to detail.
It just gives the film a whole scope that I don't think it would have had if we were limited to a regular-sized stage.
Everything we did in that garage is in this film, so that was really, really great.
I'd wanted to rethink the Batmobile. It's a key component of Batman's arsenal.
The Batmobile was so unbelievably well engineered.
They've really come up with something absolutely unique. There hasn't ever been a car like this before.
I was shocked. It was completely different to what I thought it would look like. You're watching it and thinking, yeah, I could believe that he could get a car like that.
This car is so cool. I finally understood men's fascination with cars after I saw this thing.
It's the Batmobile. It should be a car that every kid wants.
What's that? Well, the tumbler? Oh, you wouldn't be interested in that.
I felt that it was very important to design the Batmobile first before we approached any of the other aspects of design of the film, because I had a very specific idea in my head about a contemporary approach to a Batmobile, and our approach to it would tell everybody who saw it a lot about what we're doing with the whole film, which is a more grounded reality in which we're trying to base this story.
When we first started talking, Chris had this idea of crossing a Lamborghini and a Humvee. Chris was sort of making a little primitive model out of Play-Doh and said, sort of like this.
It was very, very crude. It looked more like a croissant than a car, but I felt very strongly that if we cracked that and showed it to people, they would either get it or they wouldn't, and if they didn't get it, then I'd know I was in trouble.
Then fairly early on in the process, Nathan Crowley, the production designer, came on, and while I was writing, this was crazy, he created a little model shop in Chris's garage. It was very much a film school atmosphere. That was part of the fun.
We really decided to be private and just started what I call model bashing. We just started making models of cars.
It's got bits of stealth bomber in it, it's got bits of Lamborghinis, bits of Hummers, and all different things put together in this marvelous combination.
Chris write his script and then come into the garage and I'd be covered in glue with car concepts.
The funny thing is the craftsmanship was really good too. You could see in Chris a kid that had built little car models when he was younger, because you know he and Nathan really had this down.
As an evolutionary process, Nathan was able to build one and I would look at it and make suggestions or actually change things like myself, and then we would move to the next step and then the next one.
We made about 5 or 6 Batmobiles. The one is the finished Batmobile, I think is the Mark V, so we took about 8 weeks to build.
When the script was done, we sort of presented not only the script, but all these great Photoshop elements of what the world and the Batmobile would look like so that Warner Brothers could get the whole picture. And that initial prototype is 90% what the finished Batmobile became.
We took that model to England, found these great guys to produce the car full size.
Chris Nolan wanted the Batmobile to be a real car, not just a car that looked pretty but didn't actually function, you know. His gem was, look, I want this to be a mean machine, I want it to perform, I want it to go through things, and that was, you know, how we went into developing this whole car.
The challenge is first technically how to make something as complicated as that steer and work. Every piece of it has been made. You start with a clean jig, put the chassis on, start building the roll cage around the driver and the occupants in there and build it up from nothing. The front end of the car is what is so different. There is no front axle, there's nothing holding the wheels in the conventional way. The wheels have to be held from the outside. It was difficult, but we always knew it was possible.
And 3, 2, 1, go. Chris had described the cockpit opening like the petals of a flower. We tried several times to talk him into an easier system which made our life a bit easier, but he was not going to have that. The mechanism ended up where the front windscreen had went up into the roof and then the whole roof slides back and then the 2 cockpit seats rise up. It was a nightmare trying to get that right. You've just got to have guys who've got technical knowledge of how to put all this together.
They were so faithful to our original kit bash model that the glue blobs that Nathan had put into the model had been reproduced full size. It was quite a strange thing to look at.
It's 9'4" at its widest. Lengthwise, it's 15 feet, and height-wise, it's about 5 foot, I think. Weighs 2.5 tons. There's nearly half a ton of rear axle and wheels and tyres. So there's a big chunk of the weight sitting there.
Everybody was surprised to find that the Batmobile was ready before we thought it was going to be.
That's been very thrilling to watch. A model that Nathan Crowley just built in my garage back in LA become a full-size working vehicle.
Then we have Andy and Jim going for the land speed record.
It was about 2 weeks before we started filming that we got the first prototype, without all the bodywork on, just a working chassis with the engine in. So we were sneaking the car around and taking it out to sort of hidden tracks and things, seeing what brakes, what doesn't brake. Start off testing it slowly, just drive in a straight line, make sure it handles okay. And progressively getting faster and faster. And slowly, through a development process, you arrive at a vehicle that can achieve all the shots on the page.
You can get to play Batman, but unless you're the stuntman who's driving that car, you don't get to have the coolest job.
The stunt side of it is we bring in one of the best drivers, George Cottle, who's young, but he's enthusiastic and extremely talented.
The car has so much potential. In one respect, I have the easy job because I know that if they say the car can do it, I know it'll do it.
We will rehearse every single shot with measurements of the location on a runway prior to going to the location so that you're aware of any problems before you get to the location when you've got the expense of the film crew there.
It's such a great car to drive, you know, it just screams at you, literally, you know, the noise is like somebody screaming at you. And I called Chris and I said, does this mean I'm going to be able to keep a Batmobile? He said, you're crazy, of course you're not going to be able to keep a Batmobile.
This here simulates the jump onto the freeway. The tape on the right-hand side of the frame is the barrier, and the ramp is just behind it.
We'd practiced jumping the car so much, we just testing how the car reacted in the air, making sure it was balanced, whether we needed to put kick ramps on the car.
We went out to try and kill the car. You know, that's what we were trying to do, push it to the limits.
I was waiting for something not to work. It just landed and just took off straight away.
Roll camera, please. 305 Echo, take 1. 3, 2, 1, action.
I gotta get me one of those.
The car chase in Chicago, Chris from the beginning wanted to do something really extraordinary and fast.
We wanted to be able to use the Batmobile as a real car and have a real car chase that looks back to, you know, the French Connection and films like this, not the usual kind of studio-bound use of the Batmobile.
It's very rare that you drive a vehicle in a stunt sequence more than 50 or 60 miles per hour. We took this Batmobile and drove in speeds up to 80, 90 miles an hour, I think. And then on the open road, we got up to 100 miles an hour.
There's no trick photography. It's real time, real speed. You know, when the car's going 100, we're going 100.
Our basic approach to tracking with the Batmobile is a device called the Ultimate Arm, which is basically a Mercedes ML55 with a robotically controlled crane arm that gives you shots that you can't get any other way on moving vehicles.
The first night of tracking, they were shouting out speeds of 86, 88 miles an hour. I've never done speeds like that, only on helicopter tracking shots. But to do it from car to car tracking is fast.
The director's in this Mercedes with the crane arm on it, flying along 100 miles an hour. The Batmobile's flying along at 100 miles an hour. And so really there's no room for error. I mean, one little thing goes wrong and somebody's life is in danger.
On this film, George has probably done some of the best driving I've ever seen in all the years I've been doing it. He was absolutely tremendous.
There was a particular shot in Chicago to come down an exit ramp into like this big bus depot, and they wanted the car to come in and slide sideways, almost do like a complete 360, and then back out and get in between two cars. And at first I was always kind of like, I don't know if it'll do it, and the first time we did it, it did it so easily. There was not one stunt where the car didn't drive away from it. It always managed to drive away from it. And we had to break this huge breakaway wall. No matter how breakaway it is, it's never going to be that breakaway. And I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to put the car through it. We did it. She got a few scratches, broke the glass, but apparently she's up and running again now. So I'll ask if I can keep it, take it home at the end of the film.
This evening we're doing the final part of the car chase sequence. Batman loses the helicopter and the police cars that are chasing him, and then hits the jump, takes off, flies across a river and into his Batcave. We're going to do the takeoff, and we'll land the car into a box rig just to protect the car, and then the entry into the Batcave we'll shoot later at Shepperton on a stage where we'll actually jump the car through a waterfall and land it on the stage.
Action! Okay, we good? Yeah, George's okay? We're good.
The landing in the Batcave we're doing for real with our real 2-ton car.
Initially, we were going to build a long run up outside and actually drive it in, but we had big limitations within the studio, how we could get through the door. It was very narrow. We only had like 3 or 4 inches each side of the car. We actually decided in the end to stick a nitrogen cannon in it and fire it off of a ramp just the other side of the waterfall. The flip side is we had to stop it very quickly because it would have gone straight out the other side of the set. So we had a restraining cable on it so we could stop it within 8-10 feet.
I'd like everyone to clear the set, please, and go to their positions they're going to be for the shoot. Okay, everyone stand by, please. And roll over, please. And 3, 2, 1, action!
Everything we did out there was done for real. None of the car turnovers or cannons or pipe ramps, none of it was CGI. And we really did do it. And that's what makes it so real, and, taking it back to the days of, even back to, Bullet or The French Connection or Ronin, everything was done for real.
I think this is the best Batmobile, for sure.
It just worked great, like clockwork. There's nothing I would change if we went back there and shot it again.
We're pleased with the overall performance of the whole thing. The speed, the handling, everything. It's turned out better than expected.
And action. Turning over. And action. Action! 3, 2, 1, go. 1, go.
Yeah, ready. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Everything's good? Just starting to get
12,
big now.
13, 14,
No
15.
sensation at all. Okay, check it out. Hey, what is that?
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15.
For Bruce Wayne's story to be sufficiently believable, sufficiently epic, I felt it was very necessary in the early stages of the film to have Bruce Wayne disappear, as indeed in the history of the comic books it's clear that he disappears for about 7 years or so.
Ra's al Ghul.
That, to me, is a fascinating concept, the idea of this heroic figure who, as a very flawed character, a very human character, leaves the place that he's ultimately to return to and travels and learns and then returns as a changed person.
If I hadn't been scared, they would still be alive. And do you still feel responsible? My anger outweighs my guilt. Come.
Hello there. Back to one. We'll get safety on that.
We knew one of the biggest set pieces of the whole movie had to involve Bruce prior to becoming Batman, and it had to be an absolutely massive and thrilling sequence. And we figured if we could sort of get the audience invested in Bruce in that way, then it wouldn't matter whether or not he had the cape and cowl on.
You'll turn back. Show attention. You'll go back.
I want you to look through the camera because what we'll do is we'll cheat it. We'll cut. Because I'll have the other side as well. Very good. You can't walk down that steep slope, apparently.
We were determined not to have this film feel like it had been filmed on a lot, you know, on a back lot, on the studio lot. We wanted there to be locations that would expand it, that would make the playing field and the canvas feel larger.
He meets his rival, we obviously don't understand that till the end of the film, in a Bhutanese monastery. So we wanted to place this monastery and the village he goes through on the way to the monastery in a really dramatic landscape. Obviously, Bhutan's in the Himalayas, and we couldn't go there. So we were looking for a landscape you can film in above the tree line that isn't covered in snow or it can't access, which is always the big problem. And preferably, we have a frozen lake and a glacier. You know, you're looking for glaciers that sit below 3,000 feet, which is, there ain't many. I think there's only one in British Columbia, so we didn't want to go that far. So Iceland, we went to Iceland, and there you go, sea level, glacier, mountains, no trees, rocky landscape, felt like the Himalayas. So we built a village on the edge of a glacier, and we built the front doors of the monastery on just around the corner. We were there from January till March building it. You know, it's obviously in this winter, so there's not very little light. Lots of storms, lots of rain. The monastery is being built as a miniature, and we're going to put that in behind the front doors, so it's a combination of elements.
The power of movies, you know, we can kind of go anywhere and sort of tame it for our use. It was strange to be in a section of the world where there wasn't a tree, and there wasn't the sound of a bird. It was kind of like a gorgeous Beckett wasteland, you know. It was beautifully dangerous. He was stronger than your father.
You didn't know my father.
I know the rage that drives you. That impossible anger strangling your grief until the memory of your loved one is just poison in your veins.
My thinking about starting in Iceland was I needed a frozen lake and it was going to be gone by the end of February, so we had to start.
It wasn't really so much Chris changing the schedule, it was Mother Nature really, just because he had found this beautiful lake right beneath this stunning glacier. We were meant to have a couple of days to be able to rehearse and go through the sword fight. And, you know, they called us and said, right, that's it, you know, no rehearsals, let's just go straight to it. We got to film it because we don't know how long this is going to last, because it could thaw out any day.
You know how to fight 6 men. We can teach you how to engage 600.
And lucky that we did it, because while we were filming that scene, we would hear these loud cracks in the ice, and everybody would have to stand dead still, you know. And they would call a few people off the ice and say, okay, you know, now it's only good to have 5 people out on the ice and no more than that. And gradually the whole thing was falling apart as we filmed.
Always mind your surroundings. Every so often, between setups, we'd see ice crumbling away at the head of this glacier and bits of rock and muck falling off, that you knew this thing was a big living force that was moving towards you. Anger does not change the fact that your father failed to act.
From my standpoint, really didn't involve that much. I mean, it was a handheld camera, a steady cam. We did one shot where I'm sitting on a sled and they scooted me across the ice to get a shot, which is in the movie. And so it was a really pretty low-tech way of filming.
We were able to get, I think, 33 setups in one day or something and just hammer through it, very much in the style of a smaller film. In a sense, that was a part of the film the most similar to films I'd made in the past.
Yield. You haven't beaten me. You have sacrificed sure footing for a killing stroke.
By the next day, it was pretty much just a lake again. And I like that, actually. You know, it's nice sometimes to kind of surprise yourself with the beginning and not feel completely ready. You know, sometimes there's a benefit, I find myself, to just getting started and jumping in.
We wanted to go back out again, but we couldn't, and so we faked it a little bit after that. But all the really wide, beautiful stuff, we got that on the day that we were supposed to prep.
Action!
I think every movie at some point has a location or a set that is going to be a nightmare no matter what happens. And you have to sort of suffer through that nightmare because it's something that the movie demands and has to be done. On this one, it was Iceland.
Let's go for our final checks, please, and let's stand by to shoot.
One of the first moments that Chris and I talked about in the film was when Bruce Wayne is climbing his way up to Ra's al Ghul's temple, and he was covered in ice and bleeding and has to drag his battered body into this smoky, grand temple at the top of the world.
Okay, folks, everyone here has to come down the hill now, please, without fail. Everyone, please.
Our first day shooting that, we got 60-mile-an-hour winds and pouring rain and just really, really rough weather conditions. And instead of doing this crane shot that Chris and I had talked about doing at the bottom of the village, we ended up throwing the camera on my shoulder, kind of, you know, hunkering down and walking up the hill in the blowing rain and getting as much as we could before we had to pull the plug and get out of there.
3, take 1. Okay, take the train, please.
Iceland should have a lot more snow, but it's like anything. We have to cater for any how the weather changes.
Start the snow.
Got various types of snow. We're actually bringing snow and ice to Iceland. Rain effects, well, we're leaving that to God at the moment.
Bruce's climb up the mountain, when he goes up, walks through the village, the guy tells him to turn back. That was a huge challenge, and it was more a challenge of stamina than anything else. It was freezing cold, the wind was roaring, and it was just miserable, quite frankly. And I think that the fact that we all got through that meant that we knew we were in a good place to continue.
Filming in Iceland, the first week of production was like being thrown into combat. I had a completely new crew, an all-English crew that I'd never worked with before, who did a fabulous job, but we were all kind of thrown into the mud, wind, ice, rain, hail, whatever was hitting us there, and had to work out all the bugs of not only our communication, but filming the movie and doing some crucial scenes.
The other issue we had out there, of course, was we had to do Cada and Wayne sliding down the ice and off the cliff edge, again, which we wanted to do for real. So we built an ice slide the week previously to the crew going out there.
We took 2 containers of snow out there as a backup and ended up using the whole lot. We covered half the mountain in artificial snow, and we were exhausted by the end of that week.
In terms of the stunt, we'd rehearsed, it was all pre-rigged, ready to go so that we don't keep the crew waiting. And then on the day you're standing there thinking, I hope this works.
The guys who were part of the stunt team went out to Iceland while we were filming another sequence. They would rig it all, get the timing, the wire lengths and everything. And then me and Mark would step in on the day, do a couple of rehearsals, and then the tape rolled.
Stand by, please. Buster, just remember that the hand you're digging in with, that is supposedly taking the weight of both you and the guy you're holding, so a real stop on that, really hanging from that gauntlet. Roll cameras, please. Okay, here we go, guys. Good luck, everyone. 3, 2, 1, action! Cut there. Okay, if you want to change your lens, Wally, Chris is saying, we'll keep the same lens on here, we're going to do the drop down again.
When we just had to rely on the wire stopping us again. It's back to the trust again. You've got to rely on the gents who are setting up the wires.
And it's all the background guys as well.
It's all the guys behind the scenes that you've really got to put your trust in.
Let's roll cameras, please.
It looks dangerous. It is dangerous because anything could go wrong, but it is safe. The cable that's holding those guys could hold 25 times more weight than those guys are on. The thing that's in the ground is 75 times more deep than it has to be. The compounding of all the specs to a degree where it's virtually impossible, although an accident could happen anytime, so yes, it's very scary.
Cut. You guys okay? Mark okay? Thumbs up. Excellent.
We needed one single shot, which is sliding with them down the ridge over the edge to be able to tip down to see the ravine. In pre-production, Chris and I talked about it, and we both really wanted to get a realistic over-the-edge shot and not do it CGI, not do it blue screen back on the stage so you could really get the feel that you're there. And I think we were able to accomplish it, but that meant bringing this techno crane to the top of the mountain, and it was really the best way to get it. So it was the best tool for the job. It wasn't just a toy, that we made the guys bring up there. And then Chris also really wanted to get in there with them with a handheld camera and be right in with them as they slid down the hill. And so we took our usual low-tech approach to it to test it and to see really if it was going to be fast enough.
Too slow.
And also to get an idea of how much we were going to be able to shoot on location and how much we would leave behind to shoot on a set piece that we were going to build months and months later.
What you're looking at is he's just sort of sliding towards a cliff edge. Yeah. So you're going down and you grab him with your right hand. Let's go with your turn your body around.
Like that. So on this one, we'll just get the lead into that.
The horizontal black line.
There's a great spirit that comes out of that in accomplishing what we were able to accomplish there. And I think that the attitude that Chris and I took towards it was, let's just go in there and get what we can and just get all that we can and come out of there alive with great footage.
The cheated even further back. The cheated this way.
I wasn't worried about starting with this outdoor, this sort of extreme location.
Action!
The crew and the cast and so forth came through with flying colours. That gave me a very high degree of confidence about how they were going to approach the rest of this rather large film.
That's the thing, to stand up on that glacier and say, you know what, we decided to do this, we did it, and it's fantastic. Those kind of moments on movies are hard to forget, and standing in the middle of it and going, yeah, baby, that's what it's all about.
Are you ready to begin?
I can barely stand.
Death does not wait for you to be ready. I am gonna stop you. You never did learn to mind your surroundings.
The very first time that I'd met with Chris after him asking me to play the role, he had said, you know, he really wanted me to be involved in the fighting technique so that it kind of looked organic and looked like something that I had invented myself.
I wanted to take it back to a grubbier place. A place where you feel the punches a bit more and you're actually a bit more concerned about the violence on screen.
Action.
I think there's been a lot of very, well, I think excessive use of, you know, wire work and martial arts and everything, to the point where the violence loses its threat because it's become a bit, I think, a bit dance-like, and we've become sort of comfortable watching it in that way.
You know, if you're in a fight situation, if Batman's got someone behind him and he can turn around and knock him out, headbutt him, why not? Why do a triple spin kick, double loop, you know, why not just knock him out?
We were looking for something that, when Batman threw a punch or a kick, it went through the person like a raging bull. Once we started along those lines, and one of the stuntmen we had on the film, Buster Reeves, who's a jiu-jitsu world champion and extremely talented in martial arts, mentioned to Dave Foreman about a new martial arts system called Casey, or Casey fighting method. Casey means from the heart, and it's also the nickname for the two founders of KFM, Husto and Andy Norman.
Andy and Husto, they developed Casey over 20 years.
Action.
They analysed tapes, they watched moves, all the different martial arts forms to develop it, put it together. And it's absolutely fantastic.
Take it away, boys. Throughout all the fighting movies, we've seen the traditional taekwondo, Muay Thai, the karate. We've seen all that, but we hadn't seen KFM. In terms of martial arts, like Wushu has been created over hundreds of years. This is very, very new, and it's still evolving. It's very much about being mentally aware of your environment, mentally aware of how people behave and respond to actions and reactions. It's like, what do you want to do? Do you want to kill this man, or do you want to maim him? And that comes from you as a person. So, you know, it is a lethal art.
It's very practical. I mean, these guys actually train often in nightclubs and things, and they will smoke up the room, and it's all about using what's available and grabbing that ashtray and smacking somebody with it, or being able to have a fight with somebody while sitting next to them. And it's a really great fighting style.
And we felt that was exactly what we wanted for Batman, someone who, if he feels like he's going to headbutt you, that's what he does. It's just an emotional response.
We've had to kind of tame it down a bit, and it's to adapt their system into Dave Foreman's choreography.
And action. And because it's so tight and a tight fighting style, I had to adapt to make the moves bigger. So if I was throwing a punch to the face, I would just make that bigger. I would just, you know, make the circle bigger. The demonstration you just saw, I don't think you could actually break that down unless you saw that in slow motion. You couldn't quite see what was happening there, but the boys were actually breaking down each bone as they went up from the legs to the head. So it is something that you need a lot of control on, and so we move very, very slowly, and we build up layers till we feel very, very comfortable with it. Wonderful. Well done, boys.
Christian has unbelievable stamina. I mean, I've seen his workload every day. And if he does get 2 hours off in the morning, he has to rehearse a fight.
Parents' death is not your fault. It was your father's.
We had 16 fights in the movie for Christian to get through.
Because he had such a heavy workload, we did a lot of blocking of the fights with stunt guys and just liaising with Chris Nolan on tape. Then we'd bring Christian in, put the acting element into the fight and perhaps tweak a few bits that felt character-wise like they should change.
And I would make the changes. And then when we'd get on set, it would all change again.
In terms of the fights, Christian learnt every single fight. He did every single fight.
The Casey fighting was very close quarters, so it was a very dangerous art. The hits were very direct to very dangerous parts of the body, so we had to be very, very careful as not to injure our actors or our stuntmen, of course. A lot of the hits were like 2-3 inches away from the target, so every time.
Absolutely respect the stuntmen. This is what they do, and they can obviously do any of it in a vastly superior way to what I can do. But I always like to try it, you know? And I like the possibility of being able to have some kind of stunt sequence, and then you can zoom in and whatever, and and you see that it's a real person.
Basically, Christian learnt fights very quickly. He'd go home at night and he'd watch the tapes, and he'd literally come in the next day and know the fights.
He has a photographic memory, so I would show him a fight, and it sickens me. Because, I'd show him 20 moves, and then within half an hour, he would have all those 20 moves down. I can't do that, and I'm the fighter ranger.
I am the devil.
You're not the devil. You're practice.
We all dream that we can take on 8 men at once and beat them all. And that's what the Bhutanese fight is like.
We see Bruce, younger. He has no fighting skills whatsoever. There's no technique to him. He's adopted different styles, but he hasn't created his own style yet.
We wanted to demonstrate that he had some skill, but it was really more about courage and brutality. We brought 11 guys over from Thailand, put the moves together, discussed them, said, wouldn't it be nice if, or shouldn't he be stronger here?
He wanted 8 guys coming at one guy all at once, and I had real trouble with that, because for 8 guys to attack one guy all at once is how am I going to put a fight, how am I going to choreograph? It was really quite hard
to have them all coming at him, so that he's having to work triple time to take care of them, as opposed to people standing waiting to get up at the corner of their eye, coming in, taking their hit. We found what helped that was to keep him moving. So by keeping him moving, people could drop in his wake and then come into him as well. Christian did the whole thing, actually. And Buster sort of did a few little inserts, but Christian did the whole fight.
We spent a lot of time determining exactly how much of Batman to show, how much of his fighting to show, and I had always looked to a representation of Batman that would be more from the criminal's point of view, so you would see less of him. You would see him as more frightening. There would be more suspense as to what he was doing and where he was.
Where are you?
Here. And that meant showing less of him, cutting fight scenes very, very fast, so that Batman is seen as being blindingly quick and aggressive and almost animal-like in the way he takes on the criminals.
You will never learn.
The monorail was the biggest challenge because it was the finale and we all want a big showdown. Batman is on equal terms now with Ducard. I think we feel that they are equal to each other. It was punch for punch, kick for kick, and that's what made it very intense and dynamic.
Now we can really focus on using the Casey style at the end, and it's worked out really strong.
As a team, all of us, we all put that fight together and that energy together.
Liam and Christian were keen to be involved, to rehearse. In fact, you know, if they weren't doing anything, they'd actually call and say, look, you know, why don't we rehearse? Liam was a strong fighter. Casey's actually a fighting system where you use a lot of elbows and fists, and Liam's very tall. I think he's 6'4", 6'5", he's a tall guy. So he has to get very low in order to do the blows.
Ready, and action.
We just wanted it to be as hard as possible. We wanted to show two men who are very highly trained and very highly skilled, very motivated.
When I saw the enjoyment out of when Liam had finished the sequence and Christian, you could just see the glee in their face when they finished that sequence, when they've just done 10-15 move sequence. And that's the best.
Got it there. Right, Cine. You guys all right? Yes.
I was extraordinarily impressed with the speed and the degree of intensity that the actors were able to get into the action scenes by doing things themselves rather than having the stunt performers do things for them. There's something in action and in fighting that is still very much performance, and so as a director I find it to be a great advantage to have actors like Liam, like Christian, who are willing to just dive in and express the character's physicality, even in the most extreme situations.
You never learn to mind your surroundings.
My biggest challenge was to make the KFM, the Casey, work on screen, and hopefully it's new, creative, and that's what's good about the KFM. You can be creative with it. You can be very creative with it.
It was just kind of bizarre enough to get your attention and think, what the hell is he doing? And then absolutely vicious enough, but also practical enough to believe it.
Casey reflected quite nicely our overall approach in terms of script and design, of seeing Batman not as a glamorous sort of branded figure, decorative figure, but as a functional entity.
What we have here is one of the proof of concept shots that we had to create to demonstrate that we could do the things that we claimed we were going to be able to do. We managed to sneak in one day and we said, okay, well, we'll get this shot and then we'll make our own digital version of Christian in the Bat costume. And what you see here is the finished result of our test. This is our A Batman and then B version of Batman. 3 out of the 4 people that we asked would pick the B version and say that this was the live action Batman. This in fact is the digital Batman. You are looking at the digital Batman here. It's not entirely perfect. There are things that if you know what you're looking for, you can tell that it's a digital Batman, and to be fair, Chris managed to spot it. He was able to discern which was the digital Batman, which was the real Batman. Obviously, you would never actually do this shot with a digital stunt double because you can get the actor to walk through the set. But I think this went a long way to saying, yes, we can make something that looks real. We can make it a pretty good match.
whilst I wanted the terms of the storytelling to be as realistic as possible, the expectation of this kind of epic film is that the action go as big as possible at the end. That you take things to as extreme and as large and as extraordinary a set of circumstances as can be achieved without violating the terms of the storytelling. So all of the action at the end is designed to push the envelope as far as possible, but never abandon the grounded roots that we've tried to establish in the tone of the storytelling.
Don't you have anything new? How about this?
The idea is we'll try and shoot it first of all, we'll try and do it practically, we'll do a stunt, we'll do special effects, and only then when we exhausted those ideas will we try and turn to visual effects. So wherever we could do a stunt, even if it meant painting out a huge amount of wires or a rig or something like that, we'd opt to do that. It's a frame-by-frame laborious process. The benefit you get is you really get somebody doing the stunt, it's there, it's on film, everybody can see it, whereas creating the same thing digitally from scratch, that takes a hell of a long time just to get it to that believability level.
That was something that I really wanted to crack, getting the look of all this huge amounts of steam going off, and we spent a lot of time and research. And the whole of Cardington had a network of piping with massive great steam generators, and there were, I think, 20 manhole covers, which every single one was piped in with a 2-inch outlet of steam, and when we hit every one of those, the steam went up 150 foot. It reached the roof. So we would do a run, let it all off, and then Chris would shout cut. We would switch it all off, and then it would like rain for about 20 seconds where all the condensed steam had gone up, hit the roof, and now was coming back down. Quite bizarre.
Hey! What the hell are you doing?
Gentlemen, time to spread the word. And the word is panic.
I couldn't really see anything, but I thought it was so cool. I enjoyed it. I mean, I've had so much fun every day. We have the best of the best people working on this movie, so it's like, wow, okay, what do I do now?
As we've always said, that everything we can do on the movie for real, we will do. In this particular sequence, we've done a shot of him firing the gun and flying up to the train, and a continuation of that where he's flying along under the train. So Steve Crawley, who's our wire effects supervisor, rigged up a system for us with computers, and I think it looks fabulous. He's flying along, we've got him smashing through gantries as he goes along.
By the time I get to that bridge, I think I'm hitting about 30 mile an hour. We only did about a 15, 20 mile an hour rehearsal. Did it about 75%, but today we must have gone full speed. Someone must have had the Weetabix this morning.
The relationship between stunts and special effects is very close indeed, because ultimately, Paul and I talk about what we're going to do in the scene, and then we go away, we design the rig, build the rig, but then we have to work with Paul's team to put them in amongst it and make sure they're happy with it.
When he's flying along, his boys are watching all the time to see where the performer is, and they'll time it so that he's in no danger. But we can still have him coming through the steam, it's just making sure that he's missed by the manhole covers and things like that. That's working with a good special effects team who you can trust and aren't going to hurt your guys,
It's a big thing to get set up and to get going, but once you do it, you look at dailies the next day and you've completed it. You've shot this amazing shot of Batman flying 800 feet across a city, and you've done it in an interior space during the day without the use of visual effects. That, I think, capsulizes Chris's philosophy of filmmaking, which is let's do it for real. Let's put it down the way you would see it, you would believe it, and that'll give us the kind of credibility to bring the audience in.
I wanted that confrontation at the end to be true to the spirit of the rest of the film, so that the actual confrontation be on the most human and almost banal scale possible.
Action!
decision was made early on to do outside the windows 100% CGI. So we made the decision to build the train on stage and surround it with a green screen. Yannick Assers, the visual effects supervisor, and Dan Glass, the other visual effects supervisor, really came up with all the mathematics to figure out how high off the ground the train had to be lifted in order to not see off the green screen when handheld inside the train. Action! My approach to the train was I wanted to have kind of standard interior fluorescent lighting, but wanted to be able to flicker those lights a little bit as a real subway train would in a city. In addition to that, I used a series of 30 or 40 tracking lights with different colored gels on them outside the train on a dimmer board and what they call a chase, so the lights would go off one at a time. So the effect is a flickering light on the face that looks like you're going past lights in the city streets. So when all those elements come together, you really end up creating an environment that I think is very realistic. It's taking all the technology just to go back to square one and create something naturalistic and real looking.
At the end of the movie, it's a combination of digital train, digital city, and then as soon as things start to blow up, when you really need all that kind of interaction and crashing, there's a switch over there gradually to using a miniature train, colliding with a miniature environment. It still seems more feasible these days to actually do things with real things blowing up, even at small scale, than it does to do it digitally at this point.
We've got a collapsing monorail leg, which is at the far end of the set, which special effects have matched what we've built here, and that's basically hinged, so as part of the end, the finale, it will tip over.
3, 2, 1, action!
How did it go for you?
Very well, thank you. Very well indeed.
Well done.
You get it?
Yeah.
It was quite funny because when we came to do the shot, I had a bet with Chris Nolan where it would land, and we positioned the car, and I think we had a bottle of champagne on it, something like that, where he thought it would land one place and I knew it would land another place, but ended up where I thought it would land and also ended up where Chris thought it would land, so there was no settlement of the bet in the end. The miniature department made up the monorail sections. It was a matter of hanging them up and triggering them to release, when the leg fell away. They had all the ingredients there.
We have a 6-scale miniature of the thing, and with the special effects guys and model guys, we will sort of realise the destruction of this thing as it plummets to the ground. The reason the miniatures are so big is we basically wanted to achieve as much reality as we could. We're featuring all the usual stuff of fire and dust and sort of destruction effects. So in order to make them look as realistic as possible, we've gone for the biggest manageable scale that we could construct, which has turned out to be 6 scale. The train itself is catapulted down the rail, the broken rail, using a pulley system and gravity effects. Also, the cameras are shooting at 4 times normal speed, so the train is actually slowed down on screen in order to give it sort of scale and mass and what have you. And I'm hoping to acquire a really sort of spectacular sequence out of it for the film.
3, 2, 1, action!
Unfortunately, because of the scale of a lot of the models we've got here, it's not just simply a case of just going in and grabbing them and pushing them around till you get the correct positioning, what have you. They're so damn big that we have to use forklifts and what have you to move them around. They're very cumbersome, so therefore it's very time-consuming to set up a lot of these effects. But ultimately, I think the end result's worth it. So I believe that we're probably one of the biggest miniature shoots ever. The great thing about this is we're actually getting the best of both worlds here, and we've got miniature effects augmented with CG effects, and ultimately the product should have a much more unique look, better than it would have if it had gone completely CG. So it's got a much more organic feel about it.
This can now be done on computer graphics, but it just involves a huge amount of chaos. Explosions, dust, debris, crushed cars, crashing trains. It's just very, very complex. In this particular case, a mixture of models and CG is the best way to go for everyone.
Wow! Well, it actually lights up the interior of the train as well. Very nice. Clean sweep. What do you want to do next? Another one. Yeah. Again. Come on.
We kind of take our cue from the action on stage and then work out to build on top of that. So they'll film their live action pieces, be limited to a certain kind of scale, and then we'll cut to maybe a digital shot or a miniature shot and go bigger than that, but take our cue from those.
This shot was challenging for a number of reasons. First off was that the Batman animation had to dovetail with a practical stunt in the preceding shot where we actually see Batman exiting the train from inside the train. So here we have Wayne Station pyrotechnic elements added to it. We have now added the crash set at the bottom, adding the foreground buildings, the foreground architecture. So now adding the train and the monorail towers. Debris passes coming out the back of the train, all the dust and stuff, and now we've added pretty much everything. We've got Batman in there. We make sure we can see Batman by putting lots of light on the buildings behind him. But at the same time, we can't just light everything, so we've had to dramatically add uplighters, little light sources, turn on some of the windows, add window reflections, so that we basically create Batman as a silhouette.
Constantly keep showing Chris where we're going with the shot, keeps looking at stuff, getting his feedback, getting his interaction there. And slowly the shot progresses and builds to the level where, like, oh, reaching critical mass, it's looking like it might be done. And then, of course, it's not, and we go and do it many more times until Chris is happy.
Where, as I sit here, having just finished the film, I'm extremely happy with what I've been able to do in my terms. That is to say, I've made the film that I said I was going to make. I've made it in the way that I wanted to make it. I've availed myself of all kinds of extraordinarily dedicated and creative collaborators, and ultimately they've helped me to make the film the way I felt it should be made. And there isn't a frame of the film that I don't claim as my own, and that's very satisfying from a creative point of view.
Very nice. Check the gates on that. Swap bus transfer. Okay. Thank you very much.
Let's go downstairs.